NBA free agency was once one of the most important times of the year. I remember even just 5 years ago being excited to see where guys like Kawhi Leonard, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving would land. But in 2024, with superstars signing extensions years before they could even think about entering free agency, we rarely see a move that will alter a franchise's chances to win an NBA title. Enter the Philadelphia 76ers, who just a couple of weeks ago signed Paul George to a 4-year, $212 million contract. This move made free agency feel like free agency, because for the first time in a while, a free agent signing turned a franchise from a solid team whose potential seemed to max out at around the conference finals, to a team that could very easily win the NBA title within the next couple of seasons. But of course, with every deal comes risks that could alter this franchise's momentum for years to come. So how will the Paul George signing change the landscape of the NBA, and what are the Sixers' chances of dethroning the Celtics and winning the NBA title? First of all, as I mentioned before, it's important to note how rarely these types of things happen. In the last 10 years, only 8 players at an All-NBA level have signed to a new team in free agency. It's much more common to see a player like Paul George involved in some sort of sign-and-trade, but in this case, he outright signed with the Sixers. And when you look at the 8 players that did sign in free agency in the last 10 years, there's been some hits, but in other cases, there's been a lot left to be desired. Looking at it now, the list starts in 2014 when LeBron James left the Miami Heat and signed with the Cleveland Cavaliers. The following year, LaMarcus Aldridge left the Portland Trail Blazers and went to the San Antonio Spurs. And in 2016, of course, Kevin Durant made his iconic move, jumping ship from the Oklahoma City Thunder to the Golden State Warriors. Then in 2018, LeBron James left the Cavaliers and headed over to LA, and DeMarcus Cousins went from New Orleans to the Golden State Warriors. In 2019, of course, Kawhi Leonard left the Toronto Raptors to go to the Los Angeles Clippers, and Kyrie Irving left the Boston Celtics to go to the Brooklyn Nets. And finally, in 2024, Paul George signed from the Los Angeles Clippers to the Philadelphia 76ers, and Paul George's signing was the first in 5 years where a player of his caliber jumped ship in free agency. Of course, all of this is important to look at in the grand scheme of things, but what does all of it truly mean? Well, when you look at the cases of KD going to the Warriors and LeBron going to both the Cavs and Lakers, it means the addition of a star to a team that has solid pieces around them will help push them over the edge and win a title. But what's working against Paul George is Father Time. We saw guys like LaMarcus Aldridge and DeMarcus Cousins that big free agent signings could potentially backfire based on the player's age. Now in Aldridge's defense, he did have some really solid years in San Antonio, and with Cousins, he was coming off an Achilles injury and was signing for only $5 million. But the key difference between these signings is that Aldridge didn't come into San Antonio to win the Spurs another NBA title, and Cousins didn't come into Golden State with the task of being one of the top 3 options on the title team. Paul George, at age 34, is coming onto a new team with the expectation that his play will maintain a similar level that it has for the past decade plus, and that he can come in and instantly mesh with Embiid and Maxey, who aren't necessarily guys who are optimal without the ball. And that's all without mentioning that if the Sixers don't win a title over the next few seasons, then they'll be paying Paul George over $50 million a year at age 36 and 37, where stars normally are a shell of themselves. This was a big risk for Daryl Morey to make, and another reason why I would be slightly concerned if I were a Sixers fan is that Morey tends to make these moves trying to mimic a style that has been proved inefficient many years ago, and that's the method of bringing 3 all-stars together. Rarely in NBA history has that method worked, and in the case of the Miami Heat in the 2010s, or the Golden State Warriors dynasty, that's because you had the best player in the world and 2 stars willing to sacrifice alongside them. With this Sixers team, which of the 3 stars are going to be willing to sacrifice? You'd have to assume it would be Paul George and Tyrese Maxey, because Embiid has proven to be an MVP caliber player just 2 seasons ago. But how effective could this strategy be, considering that Paul George's only conference finals appearance in the last decade was when the best player on his team got hurt? Can he truly thrive as a number 2 or potentially number 3 option? These are all questions that remain to be seen in the future. But the worst case scenario for Sixers fans would be hitting the Kawhi and Kyrie Irving level of signing. See, with Aldridge and Cousins, at least there's built-in excuses for the reason why their productions fell off. With Kyrie and Kawhi, there was no excuse. Because despite tremendous individual seasons from both throughout their time in Brooklyn and LA respectively, injuries and unique situations prevented either player from reaching the peak we had seen from both just years prior. And if Paul George's Philadelphia 76ers career is ruined by something out of the front office's control, we might see the reputation of Joel Embiid and Paul George fall even further than where it is right now. And in the case of both players' legacies, it would be unfortunate to look back on their careers and say that while they were elite, superstar level players, they never could get over the hump. But what if this signing does work out? Because while I've spent this entire video thinking of the negatives, there's a great chance that Paul George will fit perfectly with the 76ers and elevate them to a true contender. If you think about it, one of the biggest problems with this Sixers team is that they rely way too much on Joel Embiid's production, considering that he's unreliable health-wise in the playoffs. Adding Paul George, someone who's already used to his co-star being out for long periods of time, could be the perfect addition. Because while it's a failure for the Clippers that they only made one conference finals in the last 5 years, it was Paul George who led them that far after Kawhi's injury. And if Embiid is not 100% by the playoffs, maybe you could use a minute restriction on Embiid and let Paul George play as the number 1 or number 2 option. There's a lot of potential upside here for the Sixers, and if a situation like last season happens again, Philadelphia already will have a backup plan in place to continue winning in the regular season and maybe even in the playoffs. And as I mentioned earlier, rarely does this type of signing happen. So to get an all-NBA caliber player without having to give up anything is already a step in the right direction into building a championship level team. And with the Sixers signing quality role players in Andre Drummond and Caleb Martin on cheap contracts, bringing back Kelly Oubre on the mid-level exception, as well as adding guard depth in Kyle Lowry and Jared McCain, the Philadelphia 76ers may have just created their best team in over 40 years. But will that be enough to potentially secure an NBA title? And this is where the fun begins, because it's all a game of perspective. You could believe one thing about this signing and the franchise moving forward, and I could believe something completely different. But an undisputed fact is that now the 76ers are one of the 4 best teams in the NBA. Whether you rank them ahead of the Celtics, Timberwolves, or Thunder is all up to your perspective on the 76ers now. But when you look at the rest of the association, I don't think any other franchise comes close to the amount of all-around talent these 4 teams have. And now, there's no more excuses for the Sixers. As I said earlier, this is their best team in 40 years, and with the incredible depth this team has, they can afford to load manage both Embiid and George throughout the regular season. As long as this team reaches 50 wins and can secure some kind of home court advantage throughout the first couple of rounds of the playoffs, I firmly believe they could defeat the Celtics or any other Western Conference team in a 7-game series. But saying they could beat the top teams in the NBA is nothing groundbreaking. In fact, I bet some people believe they could have done it last season. It's all a matter of will Embiid be healthy in the playoffs? Can they rely on depth in the regular season to carry them to victories? And most importantly, can these 3 stars mesh and coexist on the basketball court? Thank you all for watching this video. Make sure to comment down below who you think is the NBA title favorite heading into the season, and also hit the subscribe button on this page. It supports this channel and helps let me know that you like this type of content. So once again, thank you all for watching. I'm Julian with Talkback Sports, and I'll see you next time.